So we'll be discussing menopause today. Menopause means permanent cessation of menstruation. So it is usually due to loss of ovarian activity. So it is diagnosed only after 12 months of amenorrhea and provided the other any pathology is ruled out. So it is a natural biological event. It also signifies end of reproductive life because of depletion of the ovarian follicles. There is estrogen deficiency and usually it occurs between 45 to 55 years of age. So why there is need to understand menopause? So as the life expectancy is increasing beyond 8th decade worldwide, so number of population having postmenopausal female will be more. And second thing is because many diseases in women occur after menopause, like cardiac or diabetes, hypertension, all these diseases. So this is a good opportunity to screen females around menopause, and that will ultimately improve the quality of life of female. So the cessation of menses is variable. Like in Europe, it is different. In India, it is different. But there are many symptoms which are related to menopause, which may occur before the cessation of menses. So that is why this terminology called as perimenopause. So which refers to a variable time beginning a few years before and then continuing at least for a year till menopause is confirmed. And climacteric, it is a synonym for menopause. And though the terms menopausal and postmenopausal, they are interchangeable, but menopausal should be used only when it is around the cessation of menses. After that, it is always postmenopausal. So what is the age of menopause? Like worldwide, it is around 50 to 52. In India, it is roughly 46 to 48. Premature, we say when it is less than 40, and early, we say when it is 40 to 45. So what is the cause of menopause? Basically, the senescence is because of depletion of the ovarian follicles. So the ovary intrauterine, when a female child is in utero, that time the number of follicles by the time of birth, it depletes to 1 million. Like at birth, it is around 1 million. And there is a process of follicular atresia throughout the life. Even during pregnancy also, the follicles undergo atresia, and even when the patient is taking, female is taking oral contraceptive pill, then also there is follicular atresia. And this atresia accelerates with the increasing age until by like 52 or 50, which is the average age of menopause, it is approximately 1000 follicles are remaining. That is why the estrogen secretion is insufficient to stimulate the uterine lining and menopause occurs. And certain genes are also responsible, like the genes which are responsible for DNA repair and genes for coding telomerase activity. If there is a defect in all these genes, then also there could be premature menopause. So what are the factors which accelerate oocyte depletion? So if you consider like smoking, it is a lifestyle factor which will hasten menopause. Iatrogenic causes, like if female has undergone oophorectomy, or if she has undergone chemotherapy, radiation therapy, or pelvic surgeries, like for deep pelvic endometriosis, there is a chances of damage to the ovaries. Or if inborn errors of metabolism are there, like galactosemia, which affects the ovarian follicles on long-term basis, or genetic abnormalities like Turner syndrome, fragile X, pre-mutations, etc. are there. Autoimmune disorders, multiple like polyendocrine disorders are there, or if toxic exposure is there to any endocrine disrupting chemicals, or infections. They can also, like mumps and all, like same it happens in boys also, it affects the gonads. So that can also cause oocyte depletion. So what is the global impact of menopause? Like worldwide, by 2030, we are anticipating 1.2 billion women will be in their menopausal phase. And out of those, like 80% of women have vasomotor symptoms, mild, moderate, severe at some point of their life. So some of them also experience these symptoms a decade before the onset of menopause, till maybe after menopause also a decade more. So 20 years is a long duration to have all the symptoms. And there can be additional symptoms like irregular uterine bleeding, disruptive sleep, mood disorders, difficulty in concentrating, impaired short-term memory. Symptoms can be associated with healthcare costs, loss of work productivity. So what happens during transition from menstrual cycle to menopause?
अरे लवकर आली आज कसं काय लवकर असं नाही आपण ते ना
So I think you can mute yourself. Somebody.
हा तिला येतं तिला येतंय
हा मित्र
So during menopause, around so this is unmute me as well. Slide. So during perimenopause, usually what happens, the menstrual cycle starts fluctuating. There is more than 7-day difference in cycle length in early transition, which later on can increase up to 2 months of amenorrhea, which is usually up to the first year of the final menstrual period, the last menstrual period. So during this transition, all these vasomotor symptoms can be experienced by a woman, and vaginal dryness or dyspareunia, recurrent urinary tract infections. In fact, bone loss begins before the final menstrual period, like way before the menopause sets in. So what are the hormonal changes which characterize this transition of menopause? So there is decrease in the ovarian follicle, and it secretes this hormone called as inhibin. So there is reduced level of inhibin, which is secreted by the granulosa cells of the ovary. So the inhibin, main purpose of inhibin is to control the secretion of FSH. It inhibits the synthesis and release of FSH from the pituitary gland. So when there is decrease in the ovarian follicles and leading to inhibin decrease, the FSH will become elevated, like it will rise. And along with that, there is decline in estradiol production because of, again, diminished ovarian follicles. It also reduces the pituitary negative feedback. Again, there will be rise in FSH. So the hormone shift during menopause is very erratic. Along with that, progesterone secretion also declines before menopause. Then testosterone declines, as do the adrenal androgens. And after menopause, the dominant serum estrogen, like estradiol, is the dominant in reproductive phase. So estradiol to estrone shift occurs. Estradiol is estrogen 1, E1. So E1 to E2 shift is there. Along with that, both LH and FSH hormones are also elevated. So overall, the estrogen is decreased, progesterone is decreased, increase in LH, FSH, and anovulation will lead to amenorrhea. So the stages, roughly we can say, like premenopause, perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. But these stages are actually properly divided, like standardized, and with a proper framework to for clinical and research purpose. And it is like reproductive, menopause transition, and post-menopause. So the duration of each phase varies individually. Like the symptoms are also varied. The phases are defined based on the menstrual cycle and symptoms without any hormonal determination. So the endocrine measurement is usually not required in menopause. Vasomotor symptoms usually present in late menopause transition, along with episodes of 1 or 2 months of amenorrhea and in early post-menopause phase. Vaginal dryness is more commonly present. So this is the staging where the reproductive aging is divided. So reproductive life, it is given marking, like I don't have pointer it. I'll see. So -5, -4, -3B, and -3A, these are the stages for reproductive. -2 and -1 for menopause transition, and +1 to +2 is for postmenopause. So again, this reproductive phase is divided into early, peak, and late. Menopause and postmenopause both are divided into early menopausal transition and late menopausal or postmenopausal transition. And the duration is variable in reproductive. Duration is roughly variable in early phase of menopausal transition and 1 to 3 years in late phase. 2 years in early for postmenopause, 3 to 6 years in late, and remaining lifespan. So the principal criteria is the menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle is variable in reproductive age depending upon various conditions like pregnancy and all. Then there are certain changes at the end of reproductive age and at the beginning of the menopausal transition. So gradually the cycle length will increase, the flow will be decreased. Then in the early phase, then the late phase, the amenorrhea will be more than like 2 months, like 60 days. Supportive criteria, these includes the hormones like LH, FSH, inhibin and all. So initially reproductive phase, they will be okay. At the end of reproductive phase, there will be less of hormones. In menopausal transition, it will be lesser, and it will be very less in postmenopause, inhibin and all. Antral follicle count is again a radiological marker, which is okay in reproductive phase, and then it depletes as the menopause sets in. And descriptive, right? In reproductive and menopausal transition, the symptoms are not there usually. or at the end, it starts at the end of the menopausal transition and symptoms increase as the menopause sets in. Mostly later on, urogenital atrophy and all occurs. So the pathology is depletion of the follicles leading to reduced estrogen, loss of negative feedback, increased gonadotrophy, and ultimately leading to hypoestrogenic state. So all the symptoms are because of low estrogen. And how does it affect menses? There will be irregular cycles. It could be like polymenorrhea also, like early, like 20 days cycle. It could be oligomenorrhea. Oligomenorrhea means more than 35 days cycle. Menorrhagia means number of days and amount of bleeding will be more. Or sometimes it can be scanty flow, that is hypomenorrhea, or amenorrhea also. Like gradually, the women will have amenorrhea. So up till now, the impression I might have created is that menopause is bad. But is it really bad? No. So menopause is good for a female because it liberates women from the inconvenience and discomfort of monthly menstrual cycle and associated mood swings. And there is always a concern about contraception if she's sexually active, and there is a risk of unintended pregnancy. Yes, on the downside, there is decline in ovarian estrogen production, which is associated with all the changes like metabolic, bone loss, cardiovascular, and all. But overall, it is not bad for a female. So, what are the most common symptoms? Vasomotor symptoms. They are most common. Approximately like 50 to 75% female will have like mild, moderate, or severe in any form. They will have along with other symptoms like anxiety, palpitation, which can last for 1 to 5 minutes. So, these are the various symptoms. Like it can be like cardiac symptoms, irregular periods, loss of libido, vaginal dryness, joint pain, anxiety, depression, hot flushes, irritability, hair loss, change in body odor, irregular heartbeat, fatigue, weight gain, gum problems. So many things are there. So these things are usually associated with menopause, but everybody will not have everything. People will have like some people might not even notice it. So that also depends. So what is the menopause transition? So it is the period after like last menstrual period to 12 months. But it only applies to females, those who are menstruating, those who are having uterus, and those who are not taking any other hormone. So there is no class. We cannot define it for otherwise, like people who have undergone hysterectomy or taking any medicine, hormonal pills, and also this is the restriction of this classification of the staging. So what are the symptoms of menopause transition? There are many symptoms, but these are the four core symptoms: hot flashes, mood swings, sleep disorders, and genitourinary symptom of menopause. So menopausal transition is early and late. Early can be associated like with frequent menses just before they move farther apart. Then premenstrual disorder type symptoms, irritability, breast tenderness, they may also occur. In late, there will be hot flashes, adverse mood effects, anxiety, and menses will be delayed. So how do hormone change during the perimenopause? So mostly the hormones are almost same, like in the mid reproductive age, years. Then what happens? This loop cycle comes. Loop cycle is what? It is luteal out of phase cycle, which means that the new follicle begins to mature in the end of the preceding menstrual cycle, causing estrogen levels to rise 2 to 3 times the typical mid-cycle level. So it will cause follicular phase of the cycle, which is usually 14 days. So that will shorten the cycle initially. So the woman can have like frequent menses or more amount of bleeding because of this. And in late, the hormones are lower, menses are less frequent, lighter, and they are more typical menopause pattern is same, consistent with low estrogen, progesterone, and high FSH level. So these are the vasomotor symptoms: night sweats, palpitation, flushing, disturbances, psychological symptoms, anxiety, depression, mood swings, poor concentration. Urogenital symptoms like vaginal dryness, dyspareunia, recurrent UTI, urinary urgency, incontinence. So what are the long-term effects? Long-term effect will be osteoporosis, cardiovascular diseases, skin aging, sexual dysfunction. So how do you diagnose clinically? The patient will have amenorrhea for at least 12 months. Then that is enough to diagnose menopause. But if you want to confirm, like if she's a young girl, like less than 40 years, then we can measure serum FSH level, which will be high, estradiol will be less. Sometimes hypothyroidism also causes amenorrhea, maybe for like 5, 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, it can be there. And it is always ovulatory cycles. We never know. So pregnancy can also occur. Like we get often the very patients like they think that they are above 40, they won't get pregnant, but in 41, 42, 44, 45 also, if no contraception is used, then pregnancy should be in our mind always. So what is premature if it occurs before 40? Genetic causes, as I already told, many genetic causes autoimmune like galactosemia, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or any surgery where oophorectomy was done and can cause premature menopause. So overall, we have to see the lifestyle measure, the non-hormonal therapy and hormonal therapy. So in lifestyle, we have to ask them to exercise and that to weight-bearing exercises. Then balanced diet, give calcium supplementation at least 1200 milligram per day, vitamin D supplementation 800 to 1000 internationally per day. Ask them to stop smoking, control their weight, and some stress reduction. So hormonal replacement therapy is the first line, provided there is no contraindication. But we have to use low effective dose and for a shorter period. Add estrogen progesterone if the uterus is intact. And usually oral route is not preferred. We will try to give transdermal route or gels or any other forms. It's local estrogen for isolated GSM. And basically it is individualized approach. So SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor or norepinephrine inhibitors, paroxetine, 7.5 to 8.5 milligram. We can give, or gabapentin we can give, which will centrally regularize. Clonidine we can give. What is it? We have to give it to reduce the symptoms. So we can give either only estrogen preparations or we can give combined estrogen preparations. So estrogen, it can be oral estrogen like 1 to 2 milligram per day. Then transdermal patches are there, 25 to 50 microgram per day. Then combined therapy with estrogen and progesterone, oral pills are there with medroxyprogesterone 5 to 10 milligram per day. It prevents the endometrial hair. Estrogen alone, like there are estrogen, these are variety of chemical compounds which have affinity for the estrogen receptors, alpha and beta, including estrone, 17 beta estradiol, and estriol. Estriol is not FDA approved, but these combinations are there. Along with that, conjugated equine estrogen. These are the estrogen obtained from pregnant mares. Mares means female of horse, but pregnant mares urine. And for women with prior hysterectomy, this only estrogen alone therapy is recommended. But if the uterus is there, then only estrogen will cause endometrial hyperplasia or later on maybe malignancy also. That is why we have to add progesterone. Primary indication is any symptoms of menopause, or if a female is concerned about bone health, then also we can start without any hesitation. And in a younger woman who is receiving hormonal therapy, the benefit always outweighs the risk. The risk is more if the female is above 60. For progesterone, we have to combine to protect the endometrium. So progesterone also are synthetic progesterone, which will reduce the risk. And it can be like orally we can give. And there is a intrauterine device like called as Myriad. So many preparations, so many brands are there, which contain progesterone, levonorgestrel, which releases the hormone slowly into the uterus. But it is not FDA approved, but everybody is using it off-label. We can use a selective estrogen compound with combined equine estrogen, selective estrogen receptor modulator like tamoxifen. This is baciloxifene, which also protects the endometrium. So these are various like sprays, gels, suppositories, creams, tablets. So many modes are there. So what should we do like to screen before starting hormonal therapy? First, we have to take complete proper thorough history and rule out any absolute or relative contraindication or any medical comorbidities which the patient might not be aware. Like personal history, we have to see whether a coronary heart disease is there, thromboembolism, stroke, a transient ischemia attack, liver disease, breast cancer in family also, or there is any high risk for endometrial cancer or unexplained vaginal bleeding. Everything should be ruled out. And those who are at high risk of thromboembolism or metabolic syndrome or diabetes mellitus or cigarette smokers and are considering hormonal therapy, then transdermal route is preferred. And cardiovascular risk calculation can stratify, like we have to judge like whether the benefit is more than the risk. Then we can always individualize and go ahead. So when is systemic hormone therapy is advised? Systemic, like moderate to severe symptoms are there, then systemic therapy is advised. And if a woman is younger than 60 years or within 10 years of menopause, then we can give her hormonal systemic therapy, which will be more beneficial than the risk. And when taken orally, the estrogens are metabolized in the gut and liver. That is first pass effect, and that is why the clotting factors are increased. That is why there is a risk of embolism. So these transdermal and topical estrogen therapies are also available, which are timed release. So they will have variability in blood levels to avoid the first pass effect. So what are the benefits? Benefit along with treating the vasomotor symptoms, they also reduce the risk of fractures by preserving bone density, lowering the risk of type 2 diabetes mellitus, improving vaginal symptoms, may improve sleep, fatigue, mood, ability to concentrate, and overall quality of life is improved. So what if early or premature menopause occurs and patient is taking hormonal therapy? Then we have to continue the hormonal therapy till roughly the age of natural menopause. That is like 52 years of age. So this will avoid all the symptoms associated with early estrogen loss. That like bone mineral density will be maintained, their cognition will be maintained, genitourinary syndrome will not be there, sexual dysfunction won't be there. But it is also, it comes with some risk. So what are the risks? The risk increases in women age 50 to 59 years of age with breast cancers. A combination of estrogen and progesterone can be given. It also increases the risk of endometrial hyperplasia or cancers if it is not given with progesterone. Causes venous thromboembolism and gallbladder disease. Also increases the risk of stroke. And older the age of initiation or starting of hormonal therapy, particularly like more than 20 years after menopause or after 60 years of menopause, the risk is more for MI, myocardial infarction, cardiovascular diseases, and stroke. So when started in older women, estrogen plus progesterone therapy probably increases the risk of dementia as well. Not proven, but there are certain studies which have said that. So how can we reduce the risk of hormone therapy? So the risk basically depends upon the type of estrogen, dose, duration of use, route of administration, timing of initiation, and whether progesterone is given or not. So we have to individualize all these things. And using the best available evidence to maximize the benefit and minimize the risk, we can customize it according to the patient and continue it. Along with that, we can try this bioidentical hormonal therapy. Like they are similar to endogenous hormones, and they are not processed like these. These preparations are there called as phytoestrogens. So these are obtained. They are plant based. So they are obtained from plant, and then in the body they are processed and they act similar to estrogen. So these are also very widely, like soybean, I to give to all the patients above 40, I give calcium in combination with isoflavonoids. So which acts like a natural estrogen. So especially when these concerns are there, like if somebody is worried about either underdosing or overdosing, or because of the variance in content, or lack of warning labels, like the patient is not compliant, not aware, or might not report again, or if there is any allergy or there is a concern about sterility or impurities, then we can always give this bioidentical hormonal therapy. What is compounded hormonal pellets? Pellets means they are inserted beyond the beneath the skin. So these are usually not recommended because of the supraphysiologic dosing of estrogen and testosterone, so which is not controlled. And intramuscular and intravenous is never recommended. Low dose we can give estradiol, conjugated estrogen, dihydroepiandrosterone. These are recommended first line for atrophy, dryness, dyspareunia, and all. Contraindication, as I already told, breast cancer, endometrial cancer, undiagnosed bleeding, thromboembolism, and liver disease. So complications, if it is untreated, like a female is having all this, and if it is untreated, then it might lead to severe osteoporosis, fractures, cardiovascular diseases, genitourinary syndrome, and ultimately the quality of life will be reduced. So once we have started, how long should we continue the therapy? So ideally, we have to continue at least for 3 to 5 years for or until the relief of vasomotor symptoms. And the woman can continue for her own relief also, like improving the quality of life, or if she wants to reduce the risk of fracture, or if the patient is switching from oral to transdermal, then also we can continue, and then we can taper it down. and using then again start using progesterone instead of synthetic progesterone. So all these things will minimize the cardiovascular risk. Longer duration may be more favorable for only estrogen than estrogen and progesterone as per the WHO trials. So ongoing evaluation, it's a continuous research work is going on, but ultimately we have to keep on assessing the need of the therapy. Like every 6 months to 1 year, we have to keep on checking whether the same therapy will do, or we have to change something, or we have to stop, or any additional risk factors are there developed in last 1 year or so. So how can the menopause transition be treated? So as I've already told, there is instability in menopause transition. So the hormones are erratic. So we can give this sex steroids like hormones for symptomatic relief, and traditional postmenopausal hormone therapy it can also be given. But in the only drawback in such a situation is it will not provide contraception. So we might have to add some other contraceptive measure also. So because it will not suppress ovarian function, and ultimately it might lead to breakthrough bleeding, like intermenstrual bleeding will be there. So we can give always this continuous combined hormonal contraceptive. So they are recommended, FDA approved, and anybody like eligible woman can take that. The again comes with some drawbacks, like the risk is increased with age. So we have to take the lowest dose that will meet a woman's requirement, and administer it continuously to avoid the fluctuation in the pill free or patch free, like it is also available in patches. So pill free or patch free we have to avoid that fluctuation, so we have to give it continuously. Alternative regimen is also there that I told, LNG, IUS, Mirena, but which is not FDA approved. Gels, rings are also there. So in menopause, this genitourinary syndrome is also there, which was a terminology which was coined in 2014. It attributes to hypoestrogenism, and it leads to cessation of ovarian function. So it has replaced, initially people used to say vulvovaginal atrophy, which was very narrow terminology because it was related only to vulva and vagina. So what are the symptoms? Like dryness, burning, irritation, discomfort, dyspareunia. Along with that, they have added like genitourinary. So urinary symptoms are also added, like dysuria, because these are also like frequently seen in postmenopausal female. Dysuria, urgency, frequency, incontinence, then recurrent urinary tract infection because of vaginal dryness and all, because of ultimately hypoestrogenism. The tissues affected are labia majora, minora, clitoris, vestibule, introitus, vagina, urethra, trigone, and bladder. So this is a complete terminology which is including all the factors. It is a chronic progressive disease which worsens with time if it is not treated, but it is reversible with use of local and systemic therapies. So we should always ask about all these symptoms and sexual concerns also. So more than 50% of the females, they have this GSM in their life after menopause, perimenopause, or after menopause. So many female, they are also not aware that this is a treatable condition, and that is why they are uncomfortable asking for help. 27 to 84%, like it is a wide range. So wide range is there because it is usually underreported, underdiagnosed, undertreated. And despite of high prevalence, people don't seek help. So the pathology is loss of vaginal epithelial thickness, which is the hallmark of GSM. It also reflects high concentration of estrogen receptors in the tissue layer. But when along with the high receptors of estrogen, androgen and progesterone is also present, that means it has crossed beyond the hormonal influence. It has crossed beyond the epithelium. So is it same as vulvovaginal? No. So I have already told that it is not same. It is different. It is this is only specific to vulva and vagina, and GSM is a broad terminology, which is a complete terminology. That is why this nomenclature was done. So how do we diagnose? Like typical symptoms are there, which I have already told, like dysuria, dyspareunia, incontinence, infections, and all. So perimenopausal and postmenopausal female, if they have any other causes eliminated, then we can diagnose them as, like we can label them as GSM. But we have to examine also and see if any other overlapping genital conditions like vaginitis, vulvodynia, vulvar dystrophy, dysplasia, all these things we have to check and rule out. Physical signs will be epithelial thinning, tenderness, pallor will be there, or erythema will be there, or decreased moisture like dryness will be there. And symptoms may occur in the absence of physical signs and symptoms, but may be present with physical signs are present. In the absence of infection, only pH, if it is less than, it is greater than 5, it's a reliable measure of vaginal hypoestrogenism. So what is the treatment? First line treatment is moisturizers during daily activities and personal lubricants during sexual activity. Moisturizers and lubricants, they are water-based, oil-based, and silicone-based. So water-based are like natural lubricants, but they are short-lasting and must be reapplied. Like frequently, they need to be applied. Silicone lubricants are more slippery and they are long-lasting, but they could be messy, sticky, hard to clean, incompatible with silicone sex toys, and may stain bedsheets. So oil-based lubricants are intermediate in slipperiness, longevity, but they degrade condom. So sometimes they contraception is a concern. Locally, we can give creams 0.5 gram vaginally 2 to 3 weeks, vaginal tablets 10 microgram. It will restore the epithelium and lubrication. And basically, it will not be systemically absorbed, but there will be minimal systemic absorption, which should not be harmful. Topically, we can also give lidocaine, lignocaine 4% with silicone lubricant just before intercourse. It will improve dyspareunia. Or low dose vulvovaginal estrogen therapy. It is also available in the form of rings, inserts, creams, tablets, or dehydroepiandrosterone. It is a non-estrogen therapy, but inside the body it gets intracellularly converted to estradiol estrogen, testosterone. So it acts like an estrogen. Also, this selective estrogen receptor modulator, ospemifene, it is a oral therapy. Those who cannot use vulvovaginal approach. So how do we treat when estrogen is contraindicated? Like breast cancer survivors, they often experience symptoms, especially receiving aromatase inhibitors. So non-hormone treatment we have to give first. And we can always discuss with the oncologist and start low-dose vulvovaginal estrogen therapy since the systemic absorption will be less. And we can consider this, provided the risk is lesser than the benefit. So what are the recurrent urinary tract? What are the treatment for recurrent urinary tract infection? So urinary tract infection means at least 3 symptomatic and medically diagnosed, like in diagnosed with an evidence like urine routine is suggestive of infection in previous 12 months or 2 in previous 6 months. So it causes acute symptoms, also exposes the woman to antibiotic adverse effect and has potential for ascending infections. So when recurrent, the resistant organisms will occur and with resultant harm for the woman and community and her work and everything will be hampered because of this. So GSM with low dose estrogen decreases the frequency of recurrent UTI and it has the advantage of not increasing the antibiotic resistance if we start low dose of estrogen in such cases of recurrent UTI. Moderate quality in treatment of urinary urgency. No quality evidence, like it is not very useful in dysuria, urinary frequency, urgency, nocturia. But when a woman present with both vulvovaginal and urinary symptoms, at least we should try low dose of estrogen, low dose vaginal estrogen on them. If urinary symptoms are not sufficiently improved or resolved after 3 months, then use other evidence-based therapies for lower urinary tract infections. So we should also see the pelvic floor muscles and the function for these lower urinary tract infection and presence of like pelvic organ prolapse. Sometimes when the uterus or bladder or vagina is prolapsed, then also the woman will have frequent or recurrent urinary tract infection. Bladder diary is to be maintained. Do cuff test, standing cuff test, measure the post-voidal residual urine. All these things will rule out other factors. Hypoestrogenism may be a factor for this, but it will be relieved with local estrogen application. So there are certain other conditions also which are associated with menopause. So midlife sleep difficulties like insomnia, it is one of the most common complaint of midlife women, and it is often unnoticed because sometimes the female doesn't realize that it is because of like she's approaching menopause. And sometimes because of this all continuous vasomotor symptoms, which are at nighttime also nightmares are there. So these are associated as which ultimately might lead to depression. So because of this, there could be insomnia, but there can be other conditions like restless leg syndrome, stress, anxiety, chronic pain, medications, or intake of caffeine, sleep apnea, alcohol effect. All these things could be there. So another thing is like, do mood changes during menopause? So mood disorders are more common in women in throughout her life. Premenstrual also there are certain mood changes. So mood fluctuations are there. But what happens in menopausal transition period is depressive disorders because of various conditions, like whatever she is going through. So it could be like females, those who had postpartum depression or previous history of clinical depression or premenstrual dysphoric disorders, they are more prone for such kind of mood changes. So if these mood changes are not treated, then it might lead to chronic medical conditions, psychosocial stress, and again it will contribute to more, like it will be a cycle. So we have to break that cycle. And these are all factors like life stresses, financial strain, no support, sleep problems, physical activity is not there, or any other problems are there which are contributing to depression, anxiety. So we can always start them on antidepressant, CBT, that is cognitive behavioral therapy, and hormone therapy. So it is also seen that brain fogging, memory loss, cognitive changes, all these are either menopausal symptoms or they are because of dementia. So the cognitive difficulties are usually not expressed. They are facing that, but they only neglect that symptoms, and but it influences the work and interpersonal relation. So like 50 to 60% of women will have, more than that will have, but they don't report it. So these changes are very subtle than dementia, and dementia usually doesn't occur this early. Dementia will occur after 70 years. So if estrogen will help, so no, estrogen won't help for mental fogging or for cognition. But if a young woman is operated, like surgical menopause is there, if her ovary is removed, and if estrogen is not given, then there is a risk of memory and cognitive issues. So it confirms that there is a positive role of estrogen. But in natural menopause, no. In surgical menopause, yes. So it is also seen like menopausal women, they will always say that they are gaining weight, they are not, and or they are doing anything, everything, doing gym, diet, everything, but they are not losing weight. So what is the reason? Like weight gain, is it because of the hormonal changes or the hormonal? Some people think that also that they are taking hormone like estrogen, but that is why their weight is increasing. So no, it is not because of that, but it is because of the age-related changes and the lifestyle changes and the symptoms like vasomotor symptoms, sleep disturbances are there, mood changes are there. So these contribute negatively and change the healthy lifestyle. So because of that, there could be binge eating. So that is the reason, not exactly menopause. But menopause is associated with decrease in lean body mass and increase in central adiposity and visceral adipose tissue. But because it is not directly related, it is associated. It is not leading to that. So what after menopause? We have to ask them to regularly get screened. We have to check their BMD, bone mineral density, breast screening, cervical screening till 65 years of age, and healthy lifestyle we have to ask them. And sometimes like if it is early menopause, then it can be a concern of some patients. Like people are getting married only after 35. So they are concerned that after 40, or if what if they get early menopause? So pregnancy, is it possible in the menopause transition? So clinical, though the levels of eggs and hormones are less, but pregnancy is not impossible. So if a female is sexually active and not using contraception, then there is a risk of pregnancy. So we should always avoid, ask them to use contraception, proper contraception. And the menstrual cycle, though they are few, but they are ovulatory in the menopause transition. So the risk or possibility of pregnancy is quite high. And sometimes some females have also demonstrated that it resembles the peak fertile years in menopausal transition period. So that is why we oftenly see patients in after 40 getting conceived and not wanting pregnancy. So what are the non-hormonal medications? So So SSRI, I already told. Then this neurokinin 3 receptor antagonist, this can also be given. And multiple like placebo effects are also helpful, like in 20 to 30% of the patients. Paroxetine, it also adds in improving sleep without affecting the weight or libido. So along with SSRI, SSNRI, that is selective serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, 37.5 to 150 milligram gabapentin. It is also oxybutynin and all. It is also seen that selective serotonin 2C receptors, they also improve vasomotor symptoms in small number. So we should always consider all these things and always make a shared decision in whether to start all this. These are not very commonly prescribed drugs for menopause. So who do not want to take medications, daily medications? Is there any other option? They don't want to take medicine. So yes, cognitive behavioral therapy and clinical hypnosis, all this have shown placebo effect in reducing vasomotor symptoms. It also reduces depressed mood in women. And there are many trials like clinical hypnosis performed in person with a therapist or with a self-guided program also. It reduces the vasomotor symptoms. So there are no usually adverse effects associated with this treatment. Are there any other evidence-based therapies for treating vasomotor symptoms? So yes, weight loss through behavioral intervention, at least 5 kgs or 1 point change in BMI, that will also improve vasomotor symptoms. And this is a stellate ganglion, like few studies are there. Stellate ganglion block. So what is it? It's a procedure which is performed by an anesthetist. It involves injecting an anesthetic drug into the neck, targeting the sympathetic chain at C6 and C7 to block the flushing and sensation of heat associated with vasomotor symptoms. And the effect will last at least for 6 weeks to several months, at least like 1.5 months to several months. So, but it is invasive in nature with a risk, and that is why it is always a shared decision. So, both weight loss and stellate ganglion are recommended, FDA recommended non-hormonal therapies, but still more research is to be done. Like very less research is there, but it is recommended. Combination, yes. Combination therapies, we can give venlafaxine plus clinical hypnosis, venlafaxine and placebo hypnosis, placebo pill with clinical hypnosis, placebo pill with placebo hypnosis. All these combinations, they can at least like 20 to 30% they can relieve. So what counseling we have to do while giving this non-hormone treatment option? So we have to always, it has to be informed decision, shared decision. We have to tell that it's not a single event. We will have to continuously check on whether she requires to continue same, and she has to decide on her own whether the symptoms are relieved or not, or is she having any adverse effect which are tolerable or not, or are there any secondary benefits of this. So it is always individualized. Like a female will have depend upon her demographic, menopause experience, symptoms experience, concurrent medical concerns are there, or like values also, attitude, belief, and all preferences, or importance of quality of life, all these things. So all these things will matter, and it will be a combined decision depending upon again type, source, credibility, availability, clinicians, context. All these things will change or make a decision about whether we have to give that also. So in this also menopausal, there could be after menopause also there could be bleeding, which is postmenopausal bleeding, and which is not normal. Any patient if she's having postmenopausal bleeding, then we have to suspect endometrial hyperplasia or malignancy. That is the root. So it occurs around like in 4 to 11% of postmenopausal female, and 5% of them visit OPD. And also, if in first 4 months of starting this combined continuous hormonal therapy, there is a risk of bleeding, 21 to 26%, and it persists till 1 year. So that could also be a reason. I have like described like few things now. Osteoporosis, which is associated with menopause. So there is a decrease in bone mineral density. It is seen like after 65, it is seen in 30 and more than that, 38% and above. So we can do this DEXA scan. We can check for the osteopenia, or we can check for the history of fractures, multiple fractures. So this T-score is there, -1 and -2.5. They are said to have between this, said to have low bone mass. So low bone mass, we have to treat them. because they are at risk of not just fractures, but then other disorders like cardiac diseases and all. In menopause, the less top topic is about the is hyperactive sexual disorders, sexual desire disorders. So it is less or absent of interest, and it is accompanied by lack of sexual thoughts, fantasies, initiation. So many things are there. But this female sexual dysfunction, it may be an ongoing disease, or it can be acquired, or it can be seen in menopausal female. So there are like classification. DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, DSM-5. It is classified this into lack of desire, also combined like female sexual interest or arousal disorder. Other dysfunctions like orgasmic and disorders of sexual pain can occur. So it is common, and a female has to first accept it, and around 50% have that in their lifespan at some point. So what is the cause? We have to identify the cause. Estrogen deficiency is most common cause for dyspareunia or vaginal dryness and all. Also, maybe associated sleep disruption, fatigue, or dryness leading to pain, that is dyspareunia. So low levels of estrogen, androgen, ovarian and adrenal androgen because of aging, and there is a decrease in testosterone levels. So all these things lead to hypoactive sexual disorders. So along with that, we have to screen the underlying medical disorders also, depression, anxiety, substance abuse. So all improving this, like treating this hypoactive sexual desire disorder will improve the quality of life. And many factors are there, like the partner also matters, low libido, fatigue. So many things are there. Aging parents are there, and the female is juggling between the kids have grown up, so and the parents are aged. So that's a combination of all these things which contributes to hyperactive sexual desire disorders. So complete history and check and rule out any factors like associated factors are there, or only because of menopause or vaginal hypoestrogenism it is there. So how do we treat counseling? Take help of gynecologist, psychotherapist, couple counselor, psychopharmacologist, sex therapist. So all these things with counseling and education and improving communication amongst them, that will also improve. And if not, then we can always try with lubricants, moisturizers, vaginal estrogens, and any other interventions, like whatever we can do. We can also this, if she's taking SSRI, that can also cause sexual dysfunction. So we have to switch that. These are also on trial, like not approved, but these drugs can also be given, dopamine modulator, norepinephrine, and serotonin modulators. So indirectly they help in improving the sexual desire. So in conclusion, menopause, it is a natural transition, and it can be healthy, and a woman has to accept it. The symptoms will vary, and early management will improve the quality of life, and individualized treatment is the key in treating menopause. So we should not be afraid of menopause, and we should welcome menopause just like we welcome menses. So we should also welcome menopause and go ahead. These are the references. We have a menopause society, International Menopause Society. So most of the guidelines are from that society. And thank you for patient hearing and giving me this opportunity to deliver this talk. Stop sharing.
Dear participants, if anybody is having any question or any query, you are welcome to ask now. You can unmute yourself and put forward your query. I think there is no question from the audience, ma'am. So,
Yeah.
on behalf of Rani Hospital, ma'am, I take an opportunity to thank you for taking us through a wonderful session on menopause.
Yeah, thank you to Rane Hospital, Dr. Sandeep Rane, and Mr. Abhay also, you also. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So,
Yeah.
we'll end the session over here, ma'am.
Yes, yes. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.